Hey, it's Scott with Zenvi AI. Welcome to the Systems Are Sexy podcast. Today we are joined by Sundeep Ambati. He's the founder of Ambati Properties, a company that not only manages but also owns their properties, providing turnkey solutions for investors and exceptional experiences for tenants. With a background in real estate investment and co-founding a successful home equity platform, Sandeep has a unique perspective on scaling real estate businesses, managing operations, and creating lasting value in the property market. So, Sandeep, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, maybe let's just start at the beginning there. How did you get into real estate, and how do you guys get started with your own business now?
My background is actually in real estate policy. I initially thought I wanted to work for a think tank. I came to realize that was pretty boring, actually. It was a lot of regression models and stuff like that. So I pivoted away from that, and because I had that master's degree in housing policy, I decided to start working with a developer here in San Francisco. And from there, I started working with one of the bigger single family home providers called Starwood Waypoint. And they were born out of the 2009 financial crisis. And I learned a lot about the acquisition and management of single family homes. That was a growing, that was a time. And since then, it's become much more institutionalized. And from there, I actually joined my family's business that was actually investing in residential single family homes in the Central Valley mostly and in the Bay Area. And I tried to bring a more technology focus to the industry, or not to the industry, but to our processes, which is something in general that I found that real estate investment has lacked. And um, like you mentioned in the intro, I took a leave for a while, started a home equity finance business, which I left in 2020 and then came back to our family business, Ambati Properties, full time, and been doing that ever since.
Owning the assets versus managing rentals changes your business strategy.
Yeah, yeah. So for clarification, we do both. We obviously own and manage our own real estate, and we manage for others as well. But I think where it kind of the rubber hits the road in terms of management is we manage from an owner centric perspective because a vast majority of the properties, probably 75% of the properties that we manage are and we manage about 250 doors in total. And so because of that, we try to be as forward thinking as we can on all aspects of management, with the bottom line being increasing rent and reducing vacancy losses. And what are all the things in the interim that we can do to do both of those things? Those are kind of like our North Stars. That is what we try to accomplish. And I know in general, a lot of times real estate property managers kind of get a bad rap because it's just like they're one, the forward facing towards the tenant. And, that's number one. And number two, typically someone who has a property management company is probably only going to mention them if they're not happy with them. um, and so that is where we try to be as kind of forward thinking as we can to, like I said, reduce vacancy and maximize the investment for both our own properties and for others.
Yeah, so I think we talked before about you guys have detached single family homes. Why do you why I guess why that asset class? What interests you about that?
Yeah, so the detached single family home asset class, the reason that it was interesting to us is one, I had kind of cut my teeth in that industry at Starwood Waypoint. So I really got a institutional level perspective on how those assets are managed. And because of that, we felt like we had a institutional knowledge on how to manage those assets that others did not. Whereas I think traditional investors are used to either commercial or um, large, large or small multifamily. And the old school thinking was that this is much easier to manage because there's one roof, a one system, one everything, even if there's whatever 50 doors, 100 doors, even more. And so the more people there are in an asset class, the harder it is to stand out in terms of the investments that you're finding because you're competing against more people. So what we found is through our credit facilities, we could do like pooled loans with properties that we owned. to finance the acquisition of more. And we found that we developed processes where we could evaluate these single family homes, even though every one is a little bit different. We have a scoring system in which we evaluate them, and then we are able to determine beyond just the rent in, rent out that's coming from the property. This going to make a good long-term investment as a rental, because you're looking at this very differently than if you're going to live in it, or if it's going to be a house that someone might be living in that is an owner.
And one of the topics we like to talk about on here is just scaling. And I'm wondering, as a business grows, how do you balance, acquiring more properties versus maintaining high quality management for the homes that you have?
Yeah, and that is something that is always a challenge, especially as time goes on, as we acquire more properties, specifically as we bring on staff on how we scale the family management. So the number one issue that we have with management is the tenant requests. How we manage tenant requests, how we manage tenant repairs, because it's a balancing act. Because what we found is that if there is some animosity, if there's any relationship with issues with the tenant, they might want to put in multiple work orders. They might want to, just continue to complain about things because that's the only kind of way they can get back at the owner or the property manager. Trying to manage how those requests are handled, how we send out vendors. We develop a system in which we stack orders for maintenance requests when they are not fire, life, and safety issues. If it's not something that needs to be handled absolutely immediately, we stack them, and we provide an incentive for the tenant to be patient with the issues that might be secondary in order to allow us to stack those. And what we do is we do quarterly maintenance on all the properties, and we've tried to set them up where they're continually rolling. So they're over time, they're this sent out throughout the year, these inspections, and we try to handle all the maintenance during those inspections. Obviously, things will come up at different times that have to be handled, and we obviously take care of that. But that is the number one thing in terms of scaling, because everything else, in terms of all the back end stuff, everything else you can use tech, you can use humans, you can use a lot of things to make that efficient. But if someone needs to swing a hammer in a building, no amount of technology is gonna help you there. So you try to be as efficient as you can with your time, or handle those repairs and handle those maintenance requests as efficiently as possible while still keeping the tenant happy.
That's good. Being proactive instead of reactive is always a good idea. To kind of piggyback off of that, what part of your operations are the most intensive? Is it tenant onboarding, maintenance, marketing? What's that look like for you?
I would say that it's a combination of, I think maintenance is by far the number one thing that takes up time. And I think the secondary thing is really rent collection. Rent collection is often a big challenge because there's two things. One, there's you kind of look at it in a micro and a macro way. There's the macro where it's like if there is something going on with the economy, if there's this government shutdown right now, we don't have a lot of tenants that are government workers, but if there's something like that that's impacting a large swath's ability to pay, like during COVID in 2020, that is an issue that you have to manage. And you have to set expectations with both your owners, yourself, and the tenants on how that's going to work. And also on the micro level, there are times of year where rent collection is harder. Typically around the holidays, around tax time, when people get the refund checks, it's a little bit easier, but when people pay their taxes, it's a little bit harder. So there's those kinds of things where you have to manage, and you kind of develop a system in which, and a little bit of art and science of how aggressive or not aggressive are we going to be in terms of striking a balance between collecting the rent, letting it balloon, and moving forward with some sort of eviction, because that is also very time and capital intensive. So we try to avoid that at all costs. So managing that, I think it is the second biggest thing beyond the maintenance. I think the maintenance specifically, because This is not a large multifamily apartment complex where you can have a super on site or you can have a resident manager or something like that that's kind of like lives and breathes the building. And because, like I was mentioning before, if you have 100 properties, you have 100 doors, you have 100 roofs, you have 100 furnaces. So all of that type of management and managing that, having a good CRM, having a good solution on checking in on those things is number one. Because if you don't, like in the Central Valley, it gets very hot. All your ACs are breaking down in May, June, and July, and it's a nightmare. So those are the things that you try to avoid before it becomes a fire, basically.
You had mentioned technology there, and I'm just wondering, are you guys using it, and kind of what opportunities do you see AI being a part of your business?
Yeah, no, that's actually a question that we're always asking, both internally and among colleagues and things like that, on how it's going to change. Because I sometimes think like of all the ways just ChatGPT makes your life easier, just in general, but even in the real estate space. Like before, if I had to write a description of a property, I would maybe look at the listing if we bought it recently and look at, what are the amenities in the area and kind of write it up. And, it doesn't take that long, but it takes, maybe 10, 15 minutes to get something good written up. Whereas ChatGPT, you just put in all the information and it writes it up in, seconds. And for every property that saves time. And that's just writing a description. That's just very basic. But because of that, and because it's something that, maybe 5 years ago I couldn't have imagined, I can imagine that all the data that we collect now, that our CRM collects, that we have access to, that we can analyze, that we can, we're talking about maintaining air conditioners or things like that. But if you could put all of that into a chatbot or AI or something and have it almost give you predictable results based on the information you're providing on, like, hey, these are probably the top priority houses that, the AC might fail, or these are all the systems this house has, and these are the last 5 years of issues that you have had. You might want to watch out for these things. So let's be on the lookout for that. And then finally, I think a lot of it around just the basic stuff that we're talking about, rent collection, back end accounting. I think a lot of that stuff is something that I don't know exactly how it's going to play out, but I think that that can add just, in terms of efficiency, much more efficiency in the future. And I think the thing that I would like to see, that I'd be very curious about, is how hands off can we make the process? Because a lot of times there are processes now, there are smart locks or things like that in which you don't have to physically be there if someone's looking at a unit. Some people like to have someone there. Some people would rather not have someone there. And there's other security issues around that as well. But how hands off can we be in terms of the lease up process, both to make it more efficient and to bring down not only our costs, but costs for people that we manage for, because those aren't people costs that we're having to pass on to the people that are managing property for.
Got it. Have you guys ever thought about using it for marketing, or are you using it for marketing now?
We don't use it as much for marketing outside of just the very basics, like I was talking about, writing out description, things like that. We have the basics of marketing is this. We have a CRM, which is Appfolio, which is a pretty well-known product in the industry for property management. Appfolio syndicates out to a bunch of websites. And there are a few one-off, not even a few, there's one, Craigslist, which is like a necessary evil of property management, and even for tenants, for finding property that we utilize. But we haven't explored, and I'm not saying there's not value to it, I bet there is, but we haven't really explored using it for marketing per se, outside of the very basic aspects of writing description, things like that.
And I wanted to ask you another question about scaling. Has there been maybe a decision or strategy over time that's had the biggest impact on you guys scaling?
Yeah, I think the strategy that has had the biggest impact on how we scale is really comes back to our ability to effectively manage the property. And the way we score our ability to effectively manage the property is basically a combination of what the property expenses are and tenant turnover. And there's a few other factors that we take into play, but we really look at tenant turnover as a number one thing because no matter what, it's hard to get back to a break-even point once a tenant moves out, unless you have a severely rent-controlled, unit in San Francisco or something extreme like that. Because of the cost to turn a unit, because of the re-renting fee from an owner perspective, and the cost, the vacancy loss that you're going to take on, having continuity as long as you're at market or at a reasonable market rate is the number one thing. And obviously there's times there are things that are out of your control for losing a tenant, but a lot of times it comes down to bad management. And bad management also includes misreading the market in terms of the rental price. You may get a higher rental price if the property was empty, vacant, and you turned it, you made it a little nicer, you rented it out, but your costs for doing that 9 times out of 10 outweighs the benefit of the increased rent. So really, it really just comes down to tenant turnover because there's just there. The one thing I will say in California, they recently changed the rules around how security deposits have to be returned to tenants. And I frankly think it's a really good thing because there were unfortunately a lot of unscrupulous management companies, mostly and landlords, mostly landlords, but also management companies that would as a matter of practice, just keep the deposit. And they figured 9 out of 10, if they got caught on one and they got in a little bit of trouble, it's okay. But I bring that up because they have made it they have made it very difficult to charge a tenant for anything. And I'm not as concerned about that, but the process of returning the deposit is also you have to be pretty meticulous. And unfortunately, this is something that at least I haven't thought of yet of a way in which AI would be really helpful in providing a solution. I just haven't thought of how it would work yet. And so because of that, it takes a lot of basically hours, man hours, people hours to do those kinds of things. And so if you can avoid that by not having tenant turnover, I really do think on the whole, it's good financial and it's also a good reflection on your management.
Right, right. So, kind of looking to the future, next 3 to 5 years, what are you trying to accomplish? What does your company look like? Or is it new markets, new homes, diversifying? What's your thoughts on that?
It's interesting because we have only ever focused on either single family residential or multifamily. We've never looked at commercial. We've never looked at any other types of real estate investments. And it's not because we think that they're bad or they don't make sense. It's really because we feel like we have this bread and butter and I personally, or no one else within our team has ever had a lot of exposure to it. And so that is the reason we've avoided it. But it's interesting you bring it up because one thought I have had is in California, our insurance costs are increasing pretty dramatically year over year. I think this year our insurance costs are going up about 15%. I think in years past it's gone up in orders of magnitude higher than that. And because of that, we've thought about the possibility of investing in commercial, maybe doing it some 1031s into commercial, because those have triple net leases. The tenant is responsible for all of it. And from what I've seen, it also reduces any type of liability or exposure that you could have personally, no matter how you structure the business. But I think that is going to really come to a head, especially for single family homeowners, also for multifamily. This issue of insurance. You're seeing it right now in Florida, where areas are almost becoming uninsurable. And California, there's California Fair Plans or things like that. But at a certain point, if it's your primary residence, it's one thing. You'll do whatever it takes to obviously get insurance to keep the house. But as an investment strategy, if the number of dollars and cents don't make sense, people just might start going a different direction. But it'll be interesting to see how that plays out because there's also a lot of data coming out that more and more homes are being owned by institutional investors rather than individuals. So it'll be interesting to see how those things come to a head because as a tenant, you might just say, hey, maybe I'll just be a renter forever because I don't want to have to deal with any of this other insurance stuff on top of everything else of owning real estate.
Yeah, that does seem to be a more common trend these days that people just decide to rent, especially in areas like San Francisco. Yes, people want to learn more about your company, whether it's tenants or investors. What's the best way to get a hold of you guys?
Yeah, really the best way is go to our website, ambatiproperties.com. We have really kind of all our everything that we do there. We do property management, we do real estate sales, and we obviously do our own investing. So we have all our contact information on there. We're also on social media, but really the best place is to find us is our website.
Well, thank you, Sunday. We really appreciate it. Have a great day.
Yeah, you too. Thank you.